When Mark and Olivia Carter first stepped inside the lavish Toronto mansion once owned by Aubrey Drake Graham, they thought they had struck gold. The Bridle Path estate, a symbol of luxury, had everything: sprawling marble floors, a grand piano, an NBA-sized indoor court, and even a recording studio. It was the perfect home. But they weren't the only ones living there. From the moment they moved in, strange things began to happen. At first, it was small lights flickering, doors creaking open on their own. Mark joked that the house had a celebrity attitude, but Olivia wasn't laughing when she found their champagne glasses knocked over in the kitchen. Then came the music. Late at night, they would hear faint beats playing through the walls. Not from speakers, but as if the house itself was remembering something. A deep bass line, ghostly and distant, creeping through the halls. One evening, Mark was admiring what was once Drake's trophy room. The shelves were empty now, but the space still carried an air of history. That's when he saw it, his own reflection in the glass, and behind him, a shadowy figure in a hoodie. Mark spun around, but there was no one there. He didn't tell Olivia. Not yet. Olivia was alone in the house one afternoon when her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She answered. Static. Then, a voice, low, melodic, almost a whisper. You used to call me on my cell phone. Her blood ran cold. She hung up immediately, but when she checked her call history, there was no record of the call. The final straw came on a stormy night. Olivia was in bed when she heard it, a soft splash from the indoor pool. Mark was asleep beside her. She tiptoed to the poolside, heart pounding. First, everything looked normal. Then, she noticed wet footprints leading from the water to the deck. A man sat at the edge of the pool, his silhouette barely visible in the dim lighting. A hoodie covered his face, but she could feel his eyes on her. Is this what you wanted? He murmured, his voice thick with emotion. Olivia gasped, flicking on the lights. But the man was gone. All that remained was an empty champagne bottle, floating gently in the water. The next morning, Mark and Olivia packed their bags. They left a single notepad on the kitchen counter with a question written on it. Who are you? By the time they returned to grab the last of their things, the page had been filled. 3 letters. Ovo. They never looked back. The mansion stood silent beneath the weight of the storm, its massive black gates glistening with rain. Thunder rolled over the Bridle Path, its deep growl echoing through the hollow streets lined with empty driveways and manicured hedges. Mark tightened his grip on the suitcase handle, glancing at Olivia as she hesitated on the threshold. She stood with one hand on the doorframe, her fingers brushing against the smooth wood, as if feeling for something unseen, something left behind. The house did not want them to leave. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of cedarwood and something faintly metallic, like the memory of a recording studio long abandoned. The chandeliers swayed ever so slightly, their crystal prisms catching flashes of lightning from the floor-to-ceiling windows. The echoes of their footsteps seemed too loud, swallowed by the vastness of the space. They had packed in haste. Clothes were thrown haphazardly into suitcases, drawers left half open, the remnants of a life that had not yet settled. Olivia's coffee cup still sat on the marble countertop, a half-moon of lipstick staining the rim. But it was the notepad on the kitchen island that drew Mark's eyes once more. He hadn't dared to touch it since the message appeared. 3 letters, black ink, a simple signature, and yet it carried the weight of something unnatural. Ovo. He had tried to reason with himself. Maybe it was a joke, some remnant of the past scribbled absent-mindedly on a forgotten page. Maybe Olivia had written it in her sleep. Maybe a sound. Not the wind, not the storm, something deeper, a reverberation, like bass shaking the walls of a club at the edge of the city. The floorboards hummed beneath them, the faintest vibration creeping up through their feet. Olivia stiffened, her breath catching in her throat. Then footsteps, not their own. Slow, measured, moving from the direction of the great hall. Mark turned his head sharply, eyes locking onto the shadow at the top of the staircase. It was there, standing just beyond the edge of the dim light. A figure hood pulled low over its face, shoulders squared, unmoving. A gust of wind howled through the house, though none of the windows were open. The chandelier rattled above them. Mark's heart pounded against his ribs, the blood rushing in his ears. He tried to swallow the fear that was crawling up his throat. The figure shifted, just a slight movement, the tilt of a head. A whisper, carried through the air like a lyric lost between beats. "Is this what you wanted?" The sound wrapped around them, distant and close all at once, filling the empty spaces of the mansion. It was not a question. It was something else, something heavier. The shadows stretched along the walls, pulsing with the flickering lights, as if the house itself was breathing. The rain hammered against the glass, blurring the outside world, trapping them in this moment. Olivia's suitcase slipped from her hand, landing with a dull thud against the marble. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Mark, we have to go." But Mark couldn't move. His body was locked in place, held by something unseen. The weight of a presence pressing down on him, thick as the humidity in the air. The figure at the top of the stairs stepped forward. One slow, deliberate step, and the beat, low, vibrating, pulsing, grew louder. "Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story." The beat pulsed through the walls like a second heartbeat, thick and slow, rattling the glass in the windows. It wasn't coming from speakers. It was coming from the house itself, as if the walls had absorbed years of sound and were now exhaling it back into the air. Mark's breath came in shallow bursts, his body locked in place. Olivia's fingers twitched at her side, the urge to run battling with the cold paralysis of fear. The figure at the top of the stairs was still now, waiting, head slightly tilted under the shadow of the hood. Lightning flashed through the windows, illuminating the glossy marble floors. But the figure didn't move, didn't flicker like a trick of the eye. It was real, and it was watching them. The footsteps started again, deliberate, heavy. Each step sent a low thud through the vast, open foyer. The chandelier trembled overhead, the crystals clinking together like wind chimes in a slow, eerie rhythm. Mark forced himself to take a step back, his sneakers whispering against the polished floor. Olivia sucked in a sharp breath as the figure moved again, closer now, descending the stairs with the kind of unhurried ease that made it clear there was no need to rush. A low hum filled the air, blending with the bassline, threading itself between the walls. A melody, barely audible, like someone singing just under their breath. Started, not finished. Mark's skin prickled. The voice wasn't coming from the figure, it was coming from everywhere. The house, the air. It wrapped around them, warm and knowing, and impossibly familiar. Olivia's hand found her grip like ice. "We need to go," she whispered, her voice so thin it barely carried over the low hum. The lights flickered once, twice. The windows rattled. The house was breathing. Mark's mind scrambled for logic, for reason. Maybe someone had broken in. Maybe a security system glitch had triggered an old intercom, playing some forgotten recording. But deep down, he knew better. They had seen the wet footprints by the pool, heard the phone call that never existed, found the note that neither of them had written. This was not a glitch. This was not a prank. The figure took another step down, and for the first time Mark could make out the details. The heavy fabric of the hoodie, loose but unmistakably expensive. The gleam of something gold at the wrist. The posture relaxed, casual, familiar in a way that sent a chill through him. Mark knew the stance. He had seen it in photos, in music videos, on stages bathed in light and screaming crowds. This was impossible. But it was happening. The figure reached the last step, standing now at the edge of the grand foyer, just feet away. The air was thick with the scent of something sweet and smoky, champagne, cologne, something deeper beneath it. The bass line in the walls throbbed in time with Mark's own heartbeat. Then the figure finally moved its head just slightly, just enough for the hood to shift back, for a sliver of a face to emerge from the shadows. A jawline sharp enough to cut. The briefest gleam of teeth. A glint in the eyes, hooded, unreadable. And then the ghost of a smirk. The voice returned, softer this time. Amused. "You'll really thought you could just move in?" Mark's stomach dropped. Olivia's fingers dug into his arm. The lights surged, flaring bright, then cutting to darkness. The beat stopped, and in the silence, something moved. The house was silent, but the feeling hadn't left. It clung to the air like humidity before a storm, heavy, pressing, invisible yet undeniable. Olivia's suitcase still lay where she had dropped it, but neither of them made a move to pick it up. Mark exhaled sharply, trying to steady his pulse. "We're leaving," he said, his voice firmer now, like saying it out loud would break the tension hanging over them. He grabbed Olivia's hand and pulled her toward the door, past the grand staircase, past the dark hallway leading to the recording studio that neither of them had dared to enter since moving in. Then, a sound. Not the bass that had vibrated through the walls earlier. Not the distorted voice that had whispered through the phone. This was different. A shuffle. A footstep. From upstairs. Mark stopped in his tracks. Olivia's fingers tensed in his grip. They weren't alone. A deep breath. Another step. Something moving just beyond their line of sight. "Who's there?" Mark called, but the words fell flat in the empty space. No answer. Just another step. Slow. Deliberate. Coming from the hallway above, the one lined with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the backyard. The one leading to the master bedroom. Olivia turned her head, following the sound with wide, wary eyes. "Mark," she whispered. "Someone's in the house." The thought had been lurking in the back of his mind, but hearing her say it made it real. It wasn't a ghost. It wasn't some strange energy left behind by the previous owner. This was a person. Or at least it was something that walked like one. Mark's first instinct was to run. But something stopped him, something colder than fear. Something creeping up his spine like ice water. Who would break into this house? Who would risk setting foot in a place like this? He swallowed hard, his throat dry. "We go together," he murmured. "We check, and then we get out." Olivia hesitated, but nodded. They moved slowly, stepping carefully over the gleaming marble floors, making their way to the staircase. The chandelier above them swayed slightly, the crystals chiming softly as if disturbed by the same unseen presence that had unsettled everything else in the house. The second floor stretched out before them, dimly lit by the city lights filtering through the windows. Shadows pooled in the corners, stretching along the long hallway, touching the polished wooden doors of rooms they had barely explored. And then, a door creaked. The master bedroom. Mark froze. Olivia sucked in a sharp breath. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't an old house settling. Someone had just stepped inside. The closet door swung open. Darkness yawned before them, thick and impenetrable. Mark's breath hitched, a slow prickle crawling along the back of his neck. Olivia clung to his arm, her grip ice-cold despite the warmth of the house. For a long moment, nothing moved. Then the air inside the closet shifted. Not a gust, not a draft from a hidden vent, just the slightest pull, like something exhaling in reverse, drawing them in. Mark swallowed hard. "It's just a closet," he muttered. More for himself than for Olivia. She didn't answer. The space beyond the threshold wasn't entirely empty. His eyes adjusted to the dim light, revealing shelves lining the walls, stacked with long-forgotten boxes. Some bore faded shipping labels, others were unmarked. A few had been left open, their contents spilling onto the wooden floor. Clothing, old notebooks, things that should have been cleared out before the house was sold. Then, a sound, faint, distant, but unmistakable. A footstep, not from the closet, from downstairs. Olivia stiffened beside him. Mark's stomach clenched. They had locked the doors. They had set the alarm. They were alone, but something was moving below them. The sound wasn't hurried. It wasn't panicked. It was slow, deliberate, like someone exploring, like someone who had been waiting for them to notice. Mark reached for Olivia's hand. Her fingers trembled in his. Another step, closer this time. A quiet shift of weight against the polished marble floors. Then silence. Whoever or whatever was down there had stopped. Listening. Waiting. Mark exhaled shakily. His voice barely rose above a whisper. "We need to leave." Olivia nodded. But as they turned toward the hallway, the silence shattered. A door slammed somewhere below, the sound echoing through the vast, empty house. Then, a voice, soft, almost amused. "You shouldn't be here." The voice barely carried through the still air, yet it pressed against Mark's skin like a breath at the nape of his neck. A whisper, weightless but undeniable, settling deep in the walls around them. "You shouldn't be here." Mark's pulse throbbed in his ears. Olivia's fingers locked onto his wrist, so tight they cut off circulation, but he barely registered the pain. His focus was fixed on the space below, where the darkness pooled beyond the staircase. Nothing moved. The house held its breath. And yet, the words lingered, curling into the silence like smoke. The sound hadn't come from any direction. It wasn't above them or below or near the front door. It was just there, filling the space in a way no human voice should. Olivia's lips barely parted. "Mark," she whispered, so quietly it was almost lost in the vastness of the house. Who said that?" He didn't answer. He didn't know. His grip on her hand tightened, and slowly, carefully, they stepped away from the open closet, moving toward the hallway. Every shift of their feet sent a whisper of sound through the marble floors, a betrayal of their presence. Mark focused on the stairs ahead. The grand staircase curled downward in a smooth arc, polished railing gleaming under the dim light. The entryway stretched beyond it, the double front doors still bolted shut. The house looked exactly as it had before, and yet, everything was wrong. Mark wet his lips, forced his voice to steady. "Hello!" The word fell into the empty space like a stone dropped into a bottomless well. No answer, no movement, but he could feel it. Something was there. Not a person, not an intruder hiding behind the walls. Something woven into the house itself. The air around them shifted. Not colder, not warmer, just altered, as if they had crossed into a different version of the space they thought they knew. Then, a single, deliberate sound. From the floor below. Not a footstep, not a whisper. Something much worse. A door unlocking. Mark's stomach clenched. His breath turned shallow. Every door in the house had been locked. They had checked them twice. And yet, somewhere in the unseen depths of the house, a lock had just turned. Slowly, deliberately, as if something had just let itself in. Mark's breath was shallow, his pulse drumming against his ribs as he strained to hear beyond the oppressive silence. Olivia clutched his arm, her fingers trembling against his skin. The sound, the unmistakable, deliberate slide of a lock turning, had not come from the front door. It had come from deeper inside the house, from a door they had never opened. Mark's legs felt like lead as he took a slow step forward. His body screamed at him to turn back, to run. But something inside him, some mix of fear and twisted curiosity, kept his feet moving. Then another sound, the soft creak of a door swinging open. Olivia sucked in a sharp breath. "Mark," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "We need to go." But before he could answer, something else reached them. A breath, not wind, not the shifting of the house, an actual human breath, exhaled from the darkness below. Mark's entire body tensed. His grip on Olivia's hand turned vice-like. Then, from the bottom of the staircase, footsteps. Slow, measured. Something was walking toward them. Not rushing, not stumbling. Moving with the confidence of someone who belonged. Mark didn't wait to see who or what it was. He ran. Yanking Olivia's hand, he sprinted down the hall, past the open closet, past the grand windows spilling moonlight onto the floor. The walls of the house blurred as they moved, the air pressing in on them like a suffocating weight. They reached the bedroom. Mark lunged for the door, gripping the handle with slick, shaking fingers. Locked. No, he twisted harder, rattling the knob, but it refused to budge. Olivia let out a choked sob. It wasn't locked before. Footsteps reached the top of the stairs. Mark spun around. For one terrible second, he saw nothing. Just the dim hallway, the shimmering chandelier, the gleaming floors. Then, a shadow moved. Not a person, not a shape that should exist. It was wrong, shifting and stretching against the walls, bending in ways that defied logic. It had no features, no form, just a mass of darkness that seemed to unravel and knit itself back together as it approached. And then, it spoke. Not in words, not in whispers, but in a sound that poured into the walls, vibrating through the floors, sinking into their bones. "Welcome home," Mark and Olivia screamed. The lights overhead flickered. The floor beneath them lurched, as if the house itself was breathing. Then, darkness. Total. Utter. A silence so thick it swallowed the world. And when the lights flickered back, they were gone. The house stood still, silent, waiting. And somewhere, behind its locked doors, something smiled. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story.